Theo Banhart, leave the building fund vault or closed.
That fund belongs to a vision this church voted to trust me with.
The donors restricted that money to construct.
Theo Banhart operated without oversight for 18 years as the senior pastor of a Tennessee megachurch. 1,800 families trusted him with their money and their faith. Not one person checked, until now.
Construction is more than concrete planning, advising, delays, all of it.
The database shows millions given for a sanctuary that barely moved.
You're turning a delayed church project into a crime story.
He would not be calling his attorney from that office again. Within 48 hours, federal agents would seize 18 years of church financial records, 3 shell corporations registered under his wife's maiden name, and a lakeside property in the Tennessee hills that no congregant had ever been told existed. $3.2 million in restricted donations, given by roughly 1,400 families to build a sanctuary that was never coming. The building fund was empty, and the man who preached about it every Sunday had known for 5 years. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you have ever put money in a plate, or written a check to a building campaign, or signed a pledge card at a church, drop a comment and tell me what you thought that money was going to. Because the 1,400 families in this story thought they knew the answer. Subscribe if you're new here. We cover the accountability stories mainstream outlets will not touch. Theo Banhart was born in 1968 in a mill town on the Clinch River, in the Ridge Country of East Tennessee. His father worked 41 years at a paper products plant that closed the same month Theo turned 19. His mother taught the 4-year-old Sunday school class at the local Free Will Baptist Church and did the church's weekly bulletin every Saturday night on a mimeograph machine in the parsonage basement. He grew up in that basement, bake sales in the fellowship hall, vacation Bible school posters taped to the cinder block walls. His mother let him staple the pages of the Sunday bulletin together when he was 8 years old, and he would talk about that memory from the pulpit 40 years later. He said it was where he first understood that a church was a building people took care of. That was the exact phrase he used. A building people took care of. He graduated in 1987 from a public high school of about 400 kids. His class rank was somewhere in the top third. A guidance counselor's note in his file described him as, quote, thoughtful, well-liked, and comfortable speaking to adults. He worked 2 summers at a boys' camp on Watts Bar Lake, first as a cabin counselor and then as chapel program leader. He enrolled that fall at a small Bible college in Kentucky on a partial scholarship and a Pell Grant. He met Marlene there. She was a music education major from a farm family outside Bowling Green. They married in the summer of 1990, between his junior and senior years. He was 22, she was 20. They had their first child, a son they named Wells, before Theo finished his final semester. His first ministry position was as youth pastor at a 200-member Church of Christ in Sevierville, starting at $22,000 a year, plus a parsonage. The senior pastor's annual evaluation of him after year 1 read, quote, sincere, disciplined, exceptional rapport with young people and families. He served there 4 years. Their second child, a daughter, was born in the parsonage bedroom in the winter of 1993. In 1996, he took an associate pastor position at a larger church in Knoxville. 10 years there. He preached maybe 8 sermons a year in that role, but he ran the small groups program, the marriage counseling ministry, and the summer mission trips to Guatemala. 2 of the church's elders would later be quoted in a Knoxville News Sentinel profile, calling him the most conscientious associate pastor they had ever hired. One of them said, and this is a direct quote, he treats other people's money like it belongs to God, not to the church. River Knoll Fellowship called him in 2006. He was 38. The congregation at that time was roughly 600 weekly. The interview committee's summary described him as, quote, humble, gifted communicator, biblically grounded, sound stewardship values. He preached his first Sunday at River Knoll on the second week of September 2006. Attendance the following Easter cleared 800. Attendance 5 years later was 1,100. Attendance 15 years later was closer to 1,800. He baptized 432 people over his tenure. He officiated 109 weddings and 281 funerals. He wrote 3 self-published devotional books, none of which sold many copies, all of which were displayed on tables in the church lobby. He and Marlene raised 3 children in a modest split level about 6 miles from the church, in a subdivision zoned for the county school district. Their oldest went into physical therapy. Their middle went into teaching. Their youngest was still in high school when everything began. To the people who worked with him, Theo Banwright was thoughtful, prepared, and unfailingly kind. He remembered birthdays. He wrote condolence notes by hand. He sat with dying congregants in hospice rooms and did not check his watch. He tithed a full 10% of his salary back to the church, and the elders knew this because he showed them the receipts. That was the man they trusted. That was the trust that was about to be tested. River Knoll Fellowship was, on paper, a well-governed church. Its bylaws established a 9-member elder board, all volunteer congregants, elected to 3-year staggered terms. The elders were, by design, business owners, professionals, and long-tenured members. On paper, they held final authority over the church's finances. In practice, they did not. The elder board met 4 times a year. Most meetings ran about 90 minutes. The agenda was set by the senior pastor. The financial reports were prepared by the senior pastor. The narrative summary of church operations, the future planning, and the recommendations for board approval were all authored by the senior pastor. The elders were volunteers with jobs and families. They read what he handed them. They voted on what he asked them to vote on. Almost none of them had a background in nonprofit accounting or financial audit. The church operated 2 primary bank accounts. The first was the General Operating Fund, which received the weekly offerings and paid staff salaries, utilities, curriculum, insurance, and every other line item of running a church. The second was the Building Fund. It existed for one purpose. In 2018, River Knoll launched a capital campaign called Vision River Knoll. The campaign's goal was $15 million, raised over an anticipated 5 to 7 years, dedicated to construction of a new sanctuary that would seat 2,500, a family center with a full commercial kitchen, and a 2-story youth ministry building with classrooms, a gymnasium, and a coffee shop the teenagers had already named. The campaign kickoff Sunday drew 1,500 people. The commitment cards passed around that morning, collected pledges totaling $9.1 million before anyone had eaten lunch. Every one of those pledges was accompanied by a written donor restriction. The card was explicit. It said, and I am quoting the exact language, "I hereby commit the following amount to the River Knoll Building Fund, restricted for use in construction of the new sanctuary, family center, and youth ministry building." It required a signature. It required a printed name. It required a pledge amount and a payment schedule. Donor-restricted gifts to a nonprofit are not a suggestion. They are a legal instrument. A donor who restricts a gift to a specific purpose has given the organization a limited purpose asset. The organization may use that asset only for the restricted purpose. Using it for any other purpose is not a policy violation. It is a conversion. Under federal law, it is fraud. The elder board understood this in principle. They did not have the tools to enforce it in practice. River Knoll did not retain an independent auditor. It did not use a certified public accounting firm to verify its restricted fund reports. The annual financial review the elders received was, by their own later admission, a summary. It listed a beginning balance for the building fund, a total of contributions received, a total of expenditures paid out, and an ending balance. It did not itemize which contractors had been paid. It did not list what specific work had been done. It did not compare projected construction milestones against actual construction progress. It was a 1-page summary prepared by the senior pastor, presented by the senior pastor, and approved unanimously every year on the strength of the senior pastor's word. That was the system. That was the vulnerability. And the man at the center of it had spent 18 years teaching a congregation that he was worthy of exactly the kind of trust he was now positioned to exploit. The first diversion appears in the church's financial records in April of 2019, 4 months after the Vision River Knoll campaign began accepting contributions. It was $38,000. It was categorized in the church's internal ledger as, quote, site preparation advance, contractor TBD. It was paid to a Tennessee LLC called Cornerstone Ministry Consulting. Cornerstone Ministry Consulting had been incorporated with the Tennessee Secretary of State 2 weeks earlier. Its registered agent was a Nashville Business Services company. Its listed member was Marlene Banwright, using her maiden name. Cornerstone did not have an office. It did not have employees. It did not have a website. It did not have a client list. It had a mailing address that was a rented UPS store box in a strip mall on Nolensville Pike, and it had a Tennessee bank account that received a single wire transfer per month from the River Knoll Building Fund. Every month for the next 4 years and 8 months, that wire came in. The amounts escalated. $38,000 in April 2019, $42,000 in May. By the fall of 2020, the monthly wire was $75,000. By 2022, it was $110,000. By 2023, in the 6 months before the audit, it was $135,000 a month. Cornerstone was not the only shell. A second entity, Facility Development Advisory LLC, was incorporated in June 2020. It listed the Banwright's oldest son, Wells, as its registered member. Wells later told investigators he did not know the LLC existed and had not signed the incorporation documents. A third entity, Sanctuary Project Group LLC, was incorporated in 2021 in Marlene Banwright's name, using a slightly different spelling of her middle name. Each of the 3 shells received routine wires from the building fund. Each was categorized in the ledger under a different innocuous line item: site preparation, architectural advance, consulting retainer, facility development, project management. None of these entities did any work. There were no service deliverables. There were no invoices tied to a scope. There were no meeting minutes. There were no work products. The money left the building fund, and it did not come back, and it did not build anything. Where it went was traceable, once anyone bothered to trace it. In 2020, the Banwrights purchased a lakefront property on Norris Lake in Union County for $740,000. The property was titled to a Tennessee LLC, whose sole member was Marlene Banwright's mother, who was 91 years old and had been in memory care since 2018. In 2021, the Banwrights undertook a renovation of their primary residence, gutting the kitchen, adding a 2-story addition, finishing the basement, and building a detached garage with an upstairs office. Total renovation cost, based on later forensic reconstruction, was approximately $630,000. In 2022, the Banwrights purchased a $58,000 base boat and a $92,000 3/4-ton pickup truck. Both were titled to Facility Development Advisory LLC. And every Sunday, Theo Banwright preached about the building fund. He preached about it in the fall of 2019, when Cornerstone had received $250,000 and no ground had been broken. He preached about it in the summer of 2020, standing in front of a professionally rendered architectural drawing of the new sanctuary, and he told the congregation that they were, quote, closer than most people realized. He preached about it at the 2021 Vision Sunday, when he brought a drone videographer in and played footage of the empty lot beside the current sanctuary and told the congregation that permitting was, quote, in the final stages. He preached about it in 2022, when a congregant asked in the parking lot why the ground had not been broken. And he said, and this was reported later by 3 separate witnesses, "Brother, God's timing is not always our timing." The actual construction expenditures over the 5-year period, paid to verifiable contractors doing verifiable work, totaled approximately $280,000. Site survey, soil testing, an architectural firm's initial design fee, a small amount of grading on the north edge of the lot that produced a berm and nothing else, $280,000 of actual work, $3.2 million diverted to entities registered to his family, $8.1 million still sitting in the building fund unspent, and a professionally rendered architectural drawing hanging in the church lobby, updated every 18 months, showing a building that no one at River Knoll had any intention of ever pouring the foundation for. Douglas Marchetti joined the River Knoll Elder Board in the fall of 2022. He was 54. He had spent 28 years in commercial real estate development in Nashville, most of that time in project financing and construction cost analysis. He had personally overseen the ground-up construction of 11 multi-tenant commercial buildings, 3 suburban office parks, and a 200-room hotel. He knew what it took to build a building. He knew what it cost. He knew what the permitting timeline actually looked like. He read the building fund summary at his first quarterly board meeting in November 2022, and he did not say anything about it. He read it at the February 2023 meeting, and he asked one question, which was whether the ledger's line items for site preparation and architectural advance were tied to a specific contract number and vendor invoice. Banwright answered that they were, and that he could pull the file at a later date. Marchetti moved on. He read the May 2023 summary, and he sat in the church parking lot for 20 minutes afterward, doing math on a legal pad. The building fund had received $12.4 million over the campaign's life. It had paid out approximately $4.6 million in expenditures. It had a remaining balance of roughly $7.8 million. And in the empty lot beside the sanctuary, 4.5 years into a capital campaign, there was a survey stake, a berm, and grass. Marchetti drove to a coffee shop and called another elder, a semi-retired accountant named Kenneth Whitfield. He said, quote, "I want you to tell me what $4.6 million of construction expenditure looks like on a lot the size of ours." Whitfield thought about it. He said, "At minimum, a foundation. At minimum, framing on part of the structure. At minimum, visible construction activity for a full calendar year." There was none of that at River Knoll. There had never been any of that at River Knoll. Marchetti spent the next 2 weeks pulling every quarterly summary from the building fund's inception. He was not accusing anyone of anything. He was simply reading. What he found, laid out on his kitchen table on a Saturday morning in June 2023, was that the building fund summaries listed millions of dollars in expenditures to categories like site preparation and consulting retainer, and that not a single one of those categories corresponded to a construction milestone he could see, touch, or verify from Beech Grove Road. He requested a called meeting of the elder board. He requested that the meeting be held without the senior pastor present. 2 elders resisted. 5 agreed. On the evening of June the 22nd, 2023, 7 elders sat in a private room at the back of a Cracker Barrel off I-40, and Marchetti laid out what he had found. The elders did not immediately conclude that the pastor was stealing. Most of them refused to consider that as a possibility. What they concluded, unanimously, was that they were owed answers they had never received, and that the answers required an outside forensic accountant. They voted 7-0 to retain 1. When they told Banwright the following Tuesday, he sat in his office chair and he did not speak for almost a minute. Then he said, and this was later confirmed by 2 elders present, that he considered the request an accusation, that he had never given the board reason to doubt him, and that if they proceeded with the audit, he would consider it a personal betrayal. The elder board proceeded with the audit. They retained a forensic accountant out of Chattanooga named Karen Beauchamp. She began her review of the building fund on the first Monday of August, 2023. The pastor cooperated in what was later described as, quote, "a highly qualified fashion." He answered questions in writing only. He did not permit direct access to certain files without his review. He requested that his personal assistant be present at all interviews. None of that mattered. The records were the records. We're about to get into what the forensic accountant found. Before we do, I want to say one thing. Every case I cover teaches me something new about how trust gets weaponized. If this one is teaching you something, put it in the comments. Subscribe if you appreciate accountability journalism. These stories deserve an audience. Karen Beauchamp had spent 17 years doing forensic accounting work, most of it in nonprofit fraud. She had worked cases involving hospice foundations, private schools, university booster clubs, and one previous church. She knew the pattern. She was looking for it. She found it in 3 weeks. The first thing she pulled was the Tennessee Secretary of State registration for Cornerstone Ministry Consulting LLC. She had the entity's name from the church ledger. 10 minutes on a public website told her that Cornerstone was registered to a woman using the last name Kessler. 10 more minutes told her that Kessler was Marlene Banwright's maiden name. 20 more minutes and she had Facility Development Advisory and Sanctuary Project Group tied back to the same family. She pulled the wire transfer records from the Building Funds Bank. Every wire to the 3 LLCs came with a memo line categorizing it as a legitimate church operating expense. She cross-referenced the LLCs against the state's vendor licensing database. None of the 3 held a contractor license, an architect license, a general business license for construction consulting, or any other credential that would qualify them to bill for the work they were nominally being paid for. None of them had ever filed a state tax return that reported meaningful revenue from anyone other than River Knoll Fellowship. Then she did the thing that produced the smoking gun. River Knoll, like most churches with a serious capital campaign, maintained a donor management database. The database recorded every donor, every pledge, every payment, and, critically, every written donor restriction. When a congregant filled out a Vision River Knoll pledge card and wrote, "Restricted to building fund only," the church's contribution office entered that restriction into the donor's record. It was a legal necessity. It was also a paper trail. Beauchamp pulled the database's total column. Restricted contributions to the building fund, from campaign inception through the audit date, totaled $12.4 million. She pulled the payments column from the building fund's bank account. Expenditures made to entities and individuals verifiable as actual construction vendors, actually performing scoped work, totaled approximately $280,000. She built a single spreadsheet. On the left, she listed the donors, alphabetically, 1,407 of them, each one with a pledge amount, a payment history, and the written restriction pulled directly from their signed pledge card. On the right, she listed every payment ever made out of the building fund, itemized by recipient, categorized as either verifiable construction work or unverifiable transfer to a shell. The verifiable column totaled $280,000. The unverifiable column totaled $3.19 million. The rest, $8.1 million, was still sitting in the account. The spreadsheet was 32 pages long. It was the document that would sit at the center of a federal indictment 9 months later. Beauchamp presented her findings to the Elder Board on the evening of November the 14th, 2023, in the same private room at the back of the Cracker Barrel where the original vote had been taken. She walked them through the shell entities. She walked them through the donor restrictions. She walked them through the property titled "To a Woman in Memory Care." She told them, on the record, that in her professional judgment, the pattern was consistent with a 5-year scheme to convert restricted charitable donations to personal use. One of the elders, a retired school teacher in his late 60s, put his head down on the table and did not lift it again for the rest of the presentation. The Elder Board contacted counsel the following morning. Counsel contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office for the appropriate federal district in Tennessee the following week. The FBI opened its file on Theo Banwright on the first Monday of December. The Bureau moved quickly. Search warrants were prepared for the Shell LLC's bank accounts, the primary residence, the Norris Lake property, and the pastor's office at River Knoll Fellowship. The warrants were signed by a federal magistrate on a Tuesday in late February 2024. They were executed the following morning. He was at his desk when they came. It was a Wednesday, 9:42 in the morning. He had a Thursday night sermon outline on his monitor and a cup of coffee going cold at his elbow. His personal assistant was at her desk in the outer office. There was a small potted fig tree in the corner of the study, a shelf of theological commentaries in the closest bookcase, and framed photographs of his wife and 3 children on the credenza behind him. 2 special agents entered the outer office at 9:42. A third stood in the hallway with the church's operations manager. The lead agent introduced himself, showed his credentials, and asked whether Theo Banwright was in. He came out of the study himself. The agent explained that they were executing a federal search warrant, that Mr. Banwright was not under arrest at this moment, and that he had the right to have an attorney present during any voluntary questioning. He offered him a copy of the warrant. Banwright took it. He read the first page. His face did not change. He set the warrant on his assistant's desk, and he asked, in a voice that two witnesses would later describe as calm and pastoral, whether they could speak in his study rather than in the outer office. The agent agreed. In the study, with the door closed, the lead agent said the following. And this is drawn from the interview report, not from body cam. Agent, Mr. Banwright, we've spent about 10 weeks looking at the River Knoll Building Fund. We've traced the wire transfers to Cornerstone, to Facility Development Advisory, and to Sanctuary Project Group. We've traced those funds forward. We know about the Norris Lake property. We know about the home renovation. We know about the truck and the boat. Is there anything you'd like to say before we go any further? Banwright, I want to make sure I understand what you're accusing me of. Agent, I'm not accusing you of anything, sir. I'm telling you what we found. Banwright, the building fund is a ministry account. The consulting expenditures were for services provided to the church. Agent, by whom? Banwright, by people who worked with the campaign. Agent, sir, we have the incorporation documents. Cornerstone Ministry Consulting is registered to your wife. Facility Development Advisory is registered to your son, who says he did not sign the paperwork. Sanctuary Project Group is registered to your wife under a variant spelling. There was a pause on the recording. It lasted approximately 14 seconds. Banwright, I would like to speak to my attorney. Agent, that's your right, sir. He did not say another word to a federal agent that morning. He watched them box up his laptop, his desktop tower, 4 filing cabinet drawers, and a locked drawer in his credenza that contained a spiral notebook with handwritten notations of monthly wire amounts, dates, and account numbers. The notebook, along with the donor restriction database, would become the 2 most cited exhibits in the government's charging documents. The search of the primary residence produced roughly 40 bankers' boxes of documents, 3 computers, and the LLC formation papers stored in a locked fire safe in the finished basement. The search of the Norris Lake property produced a matching set of financial records, the base boat's title in Facility Development Advisory's name, and a signed real estate closing document that connected the property purchase to a wire transfer originating from the River Knoll Building Fund's operating bank. Theo Banwright was allowed to go home that afternoon. He would not preach the following Sunday. He would not preach the Sunday after that. He would not preach at River Knoll Fellowship ever again. The federal grand jury for the appropriate federal district in Tennessee returned an indictment against Theo Banwright in the spring of 2024. The indictment contained 41 counts, 26 counts of wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, each corresponding to a specific wire transfer from the River Knoll Building Fund to a Banwright